Hi, how's it going? This is Resident of Collinwood for YouTube. Back with another real on up to Benight Beguile. Sorry for the delay, guys. It has just been a crazy, crazy week. Book 5, Chapter 8, Spiders' Webs. The green painted drawing room was brightly lit with the long, similarly colored drapes drawn to let in the morning sun. The scent of white roses filled the room. 8 large bou- bouquets had been brought in from the village for Aurora's return after she gave birth and supposedly lost the child. Um, nights before at Gregory's house. Do not go to Gregory's house when you go to have a kid. Ever. Ever. Um, in town in a stillbirth. At least that's what Gregory wanted Aurora and her family to believe. In reality, he and Ashia had the child taken and adopted out to Philip and Mary. I feel sorry for Philip and Mary. Say a prayer for them. And so that Aurora could have a clean slate, erasing her devastating connection to Caspian Cassador, the villainous father of the child. Yeah, that's all true. That Caspian Castle. For her part, Aurora was still heartbroken. No matter how many times Gregory tried to tell her it was some sort of blessing in disguise, a child's life had been lost, and Aurora still felt the sting any mother would feel after a baby's passing, no matter how the father was. Aurora, before I read this, to keep in mind, Gregory Gregory had his own feelings about the child, and more specifically, he felt because the child was the product of basically a weird, I don't want to use the word rape, but in a sense it was, because she thought it was Gregory. Cassie made himself look like Gregory, because he was all like supernatural and stuff. And so he thought he did not want the child brought up around and where he wasn't wanted. Now, me personally, again, I disagree with Gregory. I think Aurora would have treated the child fairly, but I do think there's something we're not getting. I don't want to, again, I don't want to spoil anyone's story with too many guesses. I so I'll keep my guess to myself here. With there's something Gregory fully hasn't really said. I think there's more to Gregory and Caspian. Not related or anything. I just think there's more there. Aurora sat regally on the olive green sofa in a flowing dark dress that came up to her neck. Her daughter Evie sat closest to her, equally dressed in dark colors, holding her hand tightly. Aurora's son Nick, also in the room, stood near two large banquets of white roses, nervously fiddling with the button on the vest. It all happened so fast. I was just out of it, and when I came to, she was gone, Aurora explained of the birth. We're just glad you're okay, Evie said, squeezing her mother's hand. And I'm glad Gregory was with you. He's been really kind in letting you stay there with him while you recuperated. He's been my savior, Aurora answered. Dr. Ward and Dr. Hoppin both have said you've experienced no complications. That's all good news. I guess in times like these, we need to reach for any kind of good news we can. Nick replied, "How moving closer to his now moving closer to his mother and sister by the sofa. We certainly had our share of bad news, hadn't we?" Aurora said. "I think enough for 10 lifetimes, but we're together, and I don't think any other family besides ours could get through what we have. We're resilient, and I'm grateful for it," Evie added. "You've been here for us, Mummy, and we'll be there for you." Aurora squeezed her daughter's hand and smiled. A small tear came to her eye. I just wish we were with you for the funeral. Why didn't Greg tell us? Nick wondered. He said he would have, but been too traumatic for me, as she took the baby and she was able to give the child a proper burial. In truth, I don't know if I could have gone through something like that, not for a child. Or explained. She didn't tell me anything. Nick answered, wondered why his girlfriend would have kept this from him. Maybe she wasn't able to. She's a doctor too. She and Mummy was her patient. She's not allowed to discuss patients, is she? Especially if the patient is her boyfriend's mom, Evie wondered. Maybe, but she could have at least given me some kind of clue. I don't know, Nick answered. Nick, still sprung by Ashia's past indiscretion of keeping things from him, had always kept a suspicious eye on her, even though he loved her and he would never allow himself to fall into blindness again. Ashia kept the truth about the possibility that his former girlfriend was possibly alive somewhere, and that reality that Ashia was capable of being deceptive with what she said and did never left him. It's all water under the bridge, Aurora said. I just want to try and regroup and get us back on track. I have to do it for me, for the two of you. It's important to me. The three of us have had too much to cry over. It's time for that part to end. I agree. Too many shadows. It's time for some light, Evie expressed. As Jordans discussed a happier future, Jacob, Celeste, Dr. Ward, and Lear Lockwood entered the drawing room together. Celeste's face almost seemed as if she was about to throw up. She was pale. Sweat drops formed on the top of her bottom nose. She was a bundle of nerves. Dr. Ward, I didn't think we had an appointment, Aurora said, misunderstanding Dr. Ward's appearance of turmoil. Before he could speak, Jacob answered, Peter isn't here for you, Aurora. Oh, Aurora said, annoyed with Jacob already, as they both used Dr. Ward's first name. Then what is Peter doing here? Then Gregory walked in the room, his face matched less. He was also dressed in his full constable uniform. Official duty only called for that. What's going on here? Nick asked, standing between the larger group of his mother and sister. We've come to hand these documents to Evie. It's official legal business, Lear said. And who are you? Evie asked, reaching for the documents and being intercepted by Nicholas. Lear Lockwood, Miss Lord, I'm the Lord family lawyer. My family was Rebecca's brother. I've been asked to come to Welshport on official business representing the family in this legal matter that affects you and your son, Lear explained. Jacob, what the hell is this? Nick asked as he read through the forms in shock. It's time we take control of the situation at hand. Maybe this is for your own good, Jacob said. My own good? What are you talking about? Evie asked, taking the forms from Nick. Evangeline, we know what you've been struggling. We know that after Sebastian's death and then Matthew's death, and of course your son's hearing loss, that there have been some times you've not been yourself, and after the incident that Mr. Lord reported to us, well, we've all counseled each other and decided that this is perhaps the best thing for everyone, for the child's safety, of course, Dr. Ward added. What incident? What is he talking about, Aurora? If you read the papers, they were court orders for her to sign and turn over custody of Gabriel to Jacob and Celeste. They were also court orders forcing into Church Hill Green for the medical observation because of her sleepwalking spells, her powerful and dangerous waking dreams. Evie did not answer Dr. Ward or Aurora. Evie, what's going on? Gregory, Aurora asked again. Both did not reply. Would you like to tell your mother what I found? what I found on the balcony of your room the other night, Evangeline? Jacob asked sinisterly. This is outrageous, Stevie replied in a calm voice. It certainly is. My sister is not mad. Dr. Ward, you know this, Nick exclaimed. Dr. Jordan, Dr. Ward began, I am not here to make any assumptions on anyone. We just want everyone involved to get the help they need. Anyone without anyone getting hurt in the process. But Churchill Green, Nick exclaimed. We know the type of patients that need care there, and it's not someone like Evie. Really? Jacob asked. For months now, your sister has been having these horrible dreams, these dreams that are tormenting her and having her do things that are not in her right mind would do. Jacob turned. I'll ask you one more time. Would you like to tell them about the balcony, or should I? Evie rolled the documents into a tube and walked over to a very quiet Celeste, her one time best friend. You can't do this. You know this is wrong, Celeste. Say something. Tell them you know me and that I'm not insane and that my child does not belong to anyone else but me, Evie said. Evie, you almost jumped off your balcony. You're not in the right mind space. Raise a child and need like Gabriel. you can get, we can get you help, and we can take care of Gabriel while that happens. So said as Aurora gasped at the revelation of what occurred on the balcony. Oh, really, Mrs. Lord? Is that what you really want, friend? Evie shouted back with a sarcastic chuckle. For how long will you care for my baby, huh? How long is this fraud going to last? This is not fraud, Jacob answered. Gregory, say something. Tell me you're here to stop this, Aurora asked of the man she loved. I'm here not as a friend to the family. I'm sorry. I'm here to make sure the papers are served to the parties involved in a legal and proper manner, he said sadly. Gregory, Aurora said again, her voice stern with intent for him, and as he surprised at his hesitation, you know this is wrong. Don't do this, she added. Gregory sighed deeply. I'm sorry, it's my job. Your job to take my sister away like she's some kind of criminal? She's not. She's been under terrible stress over the last few months, but she's fine. Nick shouted. Dr. Ward, stop this. You know, Evie. You know she's just dealing with things in her life and the dreams won't last. She'll get better. I'm sorry, Dr. replied. I have to comply with what the documents from the judge say. I couldn't lie when they asked me my opinion. Opinion, Evie explained. They asked me about your dreams. Celeste testified about something you told Father Ryan. I was asked my medical opinion about a situation like yours when presented with what Jacob saw, what Celeste heard. And yes, psychologically, you might be in personal danger, which would then put your son in danger, especially Evie if you're sleepwalking dangerously on the ledge of a balcony, Dr. Wood explained, his tone sounding deeply concerned with the new mother. No, this is insane. I'm not insane. This whole thing is. I've had some bad dreams. I've sleptwalked, but I would never ever put Gabriel in danger. He is my child and I love him. I would protect him with my life, Eve replied. Neither of you are taking my child. Is that understood? No one is, Evie said as she began to uh, dart for the race. She did. Constable grabbed her by the arm to pull her back. Evie's body swung back toward her friend Celeste. This is where they were, two mothers staring at each other eye to eye in a split second, like a reflect to protect herself. Eve raised her hand and landed across Celeste's right cheek. The sound of the flesh on flesh slap went like a thunderclap on the quiet of the room. Two audible gasps. Celeste's hand went up immediately, holding her slapped cheek. Her heart was beating in her chest so fast it felt like she was going to rip straight out of her body and onto the wood floor at the hem of her bronze dress. Sign the papers, Evie, Jacob said, stepping between his wife and Evie, blocking anyone else from getting slapped. You were supposed to be my friend, but this, Evie said, lifted the rolled up documents in her hand. This is betrayal. You've been going behind my back all this time to do this, take my child. Why? Why would you do that? Evie, you don't understand. You're not well, Celeste said, deflecting. I'd expect this from Jacob, but you, never you, Evie added. Celeste shot Jacob a look. His eyes never left Evie. He stood there in his dark suit, watching her crumble in his proverbial clutches. Slowly, he was rebuilding his empire by snatching up family member by member and trapping them in a legal web that would suffocate them legally the more that attempt to wiggle out. He watched like a spider waiting out the last breath of the trap fly, waiting to strike and sink his teeth, his fangs. Enough, everybody, enough, Aurora said from the sofa. Gregor, I demand you call this off. You know as well as I do that this is all ridiculous. Evie is not what these forms, these documents say she is. Enough already. Gregory didn't respond, only looked over at the woman he loved with sadness, knowing he had no power in that matter. Unfortunately, Miss Jordan, this is what's going to happen. The court has found that Evangeline is not well enough mentally to care for her child, and even if she doesn't sign the forms, she will still be taken to Churchill Green for care, and the child will remain under the protective custody of his great uncle and his wife, Mr. and Mrs. Lord. There explained, I would be better that she signs the forms agreeing to the temporary custody so that when she does seek the child's return, it will be seen that she complied with everything asking of her and that she worked on her part to better herself. It's a very simple comply, Evie, and things will be better for you in the long run. Resist and, well, you'll just make things worse. This is temporary, Nick asked. It is not happening, Evie shouted again, lunging towards Celeste, who backed away. Gregor crookedly grabbed Evie and pulled her back. It is, Jacob said. Evie, Nick began, but soon the papers were thrown at Celeste's face by Evie. Evie began to shout at her, rightly angry, and fight for her rights as a mother. But the deed was done. Jacob and Celeste had paid off a judge to sign off on the paper to take Evie to the asylum and allow for the adoption. They had set themselves up as caregivers of the child so that no one else would or could be in control of the child's shares of the company when he came of age. The paperwork said temporary custody, but the plan was written well enough and complicated enough for Evie that temporary would never end. Lear had created a legal web so tangled that Evie would almost certainly never be able to get her child back and thus never be able to claim any rights to the company. Jacob was so callously taking control away from one family member at a time. First Rebecca, now Evie and Gabriel. Let's go, Greg said, removing Evie as she got more and more aggressive. Gregory stopped this, Aurora shouted. But it was too late. The trap was laid out, and Evie was a fly stuck to a spider's web. At the room cleared, and the chaos slowly but surely quieted. Only Nick and Aurora were left in the wake of the whirlwind of what had happened. They could hear Evie arguing the whole way out of the house. Nick quickly snapped out of his trance and rushed to follow Evie, as did Aurora, even as Jacob blocked them from exiting the drawing room. You can't do this, Jacob. You have to stop, Nick said, as they all stood at the door and watched Evie get placed into a waiting ambulance headed for Churchill Green by the two orderlies from the hospital. You'll do yourself a favor and stay out of this, and perhaps now is a good time for you and your mother to leave Terramore for good, Jacob snarled back. Evie stared out of the window of the ambulance and put both hands on the glass and pounded on it, imagining herself bursting through and escaping. Celeste watched her old friend being taken away from the front steps. Their eyes locked. Evie was furious at her. Celeste felt a twinge of guilt, but she had to do it. She had to secure her future and Fabian's future. Celeste's mouth, "I'm sorry," to Evie as the ambulance rolled along the circle drive away. But Evie only sent her daggers with her eyes. She'd been there before in a wagon headed for an asylum. This felt different. This felt more dire. This felt more frightening because Evie did not really feel a bit off. Reality felt a bit off. Her dreams were frightening. The woman on the balcony was real, was dangerous, was deadly. But she never felt in her wildest, most terrifying dreams that Celeste would be part of something like this. Now the trap closed. The spider had its prey. Evie was gone. "Come," Jacob said as he looped Celeste's arm into his and they went back into the house with Lear. Rory and Nick were left stunned on the front steps, and how everything happened so fast, so devastating. How could they let this happen? Aurora asked Gregory as he emerged from the group going back into the house. There was nothing I could do. They had legal papers. As constable, I had to comply and make sure that Eve was taken in safety and security, the constable said. Nick scoffed and rolled his eyes. Jacob's been trying to rid himself of Evie ever since the day she came to this place, and you've just aided and abetted him. That's not true, Gregory told Nick. I have a job to do. I can't allow my personal feelings intervene. He said, knowing full well he had done the exact opposite in the situation with Aurora and the baby he hid away. You have a duty to make sure that the law is interpreted correctly. What Celeste and Jacob did here was not that, Nick shouted back. Nicholas, listen to me. You read those documents. The judge signed off on them. They are legally binding. No matter what I feel and what I know about Evie is irrelevant. I had to be there to make sure she was taken in safety. You saw her reaction to Celeste. It could have gotten much uglier, and that would have been worse for Evie, Gregory explained. Aurora was silent. The cold of the winter morning frosted them over all. She shivered. Her hands trembled. Gregory took off his coat and went to place it around Aurora's shirt, but she shrugged it off, visibly angry at him. Aurora, he said, not reading her emotions correctly, you took one child from me, and now you take another, she replied. Come, Nicholas, we have to figure out a way to get our Evie free. Nick bumped Gregory's shoulder as he passed the constable and re-entered Terramore House. As Aurora past Gregory, sorry, her dark dress soaked up the melting snow on the slippery marble front step from the mansion. Aurora, please, Gregory said, reaching for Aurora's elbow that jetted as she left the hem of her dress to keep from dragging on the icy snow. She glared at the man she thought she loved, the man that supposedly helped her deliver a stillborn baby girl. Her eyes a cold blue. Gregory quickly released Aurora, slowing her into the house silently. Gregory quickly realized that nothing in nature could out in the freeze Aurora's angry eyes. That afternoon, as the Lord family braced themselves for the fallout in the press of yet another family member's admission into Churchill Green Asylum, that very place on the grounds of the Welshport Hope Hospital seemed almost stern and calm. The separate three-story building of the asylum on the hospital campus was awash in the white, fresh snow that fell earlier that morning, and inside the three long hallways on each floor were booked and ended by two fireplaces with raging fire warming the white walls and bleached white tile floors that echoed the steps of busy burses. It was a busy place, in a room on the second floor with windows facing the sea. Rebecca and Caspian continued to reassess their friendship, rekindling they had over the course of their time at Churchill Green decided to end their war. It was a decision they had discussion, they had over and over again, and that what would it even matter if they were foes? They were both trapped where they were, in the same place, and had nothing to do than perhaps forgive their past indiscretions. Forgive, yes. Forget, no. As the two sipped tea and traded stories on each other's recuperation, mind, body, then soul, Caspian discussed his ongoing sessions with Dr. Shea Hoffman in hopes that his skin grafts would soon look like normal skin and that he'd be able to walk more without the use of his wheelchair. The exorcism was now long in his rearview mirror, and Caspian was setting his new life on track, forgetting the fact that he was once trapped under the darkest, most evil vow of the devil's control and power that anyone could ever experience was not something Caspian wanted to do, but he wanted to free himself of the stigma and also get back to whomever he was before the devil usurped his life. Rebecca, too, knew that feeling. She, too, had the stigma of what occurred when Caspian possessed body, control her mind, body, and soul. This is where their worlds once again collided in the healing process. Do you ever wonder about the what ifs? He asked. The what ifs, she replied, as if he lapsed into a different language. What if Albert had never died? What if you never had met me? Those things. What would be there if? What if? Caspian, there's absolutely no need to play those games with your own mind. If you do, then maybe people will start to think you belong here, she explained poignantly. He paused. What if my name wasn't Caspian? She turned to him and tilted her ear, unsure of how to reply. I was someone before all this. I was someone, Caspian said finally, showing a hint of the human that lived under the devil that took him over. What happened to me? Asked again to her silence as they spoke. Loud voices, commotion came from under the window of Rebecca's room. Rebecca shot Caspian a look. Then she got up and peeped down through the glass. What is it? Caspian asked. Rebecca gasped. Her old hand covered her mouth in shock. It's Evie. They brought Evie here, Rebecca said. Caspian sat back in his wheelchair. They were both frozen in shock. This is odd. Why would Evie be dragged into this place? Caspian asked. I don't know. Rebecca stopped herself before she spoke. And the memories of what she and Jacob did to Evie after Sebastian's death, the lies they told, working together in tandem to make sure Evie's stay at Wincliffe Sanitarium on the mainland for Rebecca. It was a punishment of sorts of Evie moving on so quickly with Christian Evans. Jacob's motives were, of course, related to money and power. What is it? Caspian asked, noticing Rebecca lost in those memories. It's just that this has happened before, and I feel as if I'm watching history repeat itself. History that should have been avoided, she confessed. I see, Caspian said, swiveling in his chair. Has Evie always been unstable? He added, assuming Evie's history and asylums meant she needed to be there. Rebecca inhaled deeply with guilt. Not exactly. Caspian shook, shook his head confused. This has all the makings of my son Jacob, Evie. Rebecca said, pausing again to think. It is a fine woman who's had a lot of challenges put upon her since the day she arrived here, and if you ask me, she's met every single one of them and survived. Not many people can have survived what she has. I admire that, and I admit that I didn't make things easy for her either we first when she first arrived. And looking back, I should have done things differently. Evie doesn't belong here at all, Rebecca explained. So why would Jacob do this? Caspian wondered. Rebecca sat back down and took a gulp from her tea. Jacob's motives are always very much related to what he can and cannot control that's tied to the name Lord. He always had this obsession with being the one and only, the most powerful of us all, to the point where he destroys relationships with his own family. I don't know where it comes from. He's just always been this way, always been different. David, my middle child, he was a giver. He'd give and give and give. And Jacob was the taker. Where do you fit in all this? Cass replied. Rebecca shook her head and shrugged. I placated to Jacob, allowing him to be this way. I enabled him often, and things got worse. They always get worse. Your mother, who's experienced great loss. Caspian said, attempting to soothe Rebecca's guilt. Mothers like you try all kind of various ways to help the children. They are left behind in every way. It couldn't have been easy for you either. It's not all your fault. Rebecca, Rebecca's brows went up. She was surprised to hear such clarity from the man who once lived with the devil inside him, who only wanted to seek out and destroy rather than reach out and comfort. She was suddenly seeing the true side of the real Caspian, the man who became overtaken by the dark shadow spirit summoned by the witch Eliza Good. Now that Caspian was free of the darkness, in turn, so was Rebecca. Together they were facing their inner demons. There at Churchill Green, with various forms of experimental psychotherapy forcing them to admit their awful mistakes born through the wickedness that overtook them. Together in this asylum, a new friendship was brewing. Regardless of whose fault it was, Rebecca answered, standing up now and going to her hospital room door, her long pale dress shifting along the small furnitures as they peeked out of the door to see if Evie was coming up to her floor. It happened and I allowed it, but now this Evie here, it doesn't make sense. There has to be more to this. Casimir rolled his chair close to where Rebecca was. He noticed an untouched stack of unmarked documents in a leather-bound folder that was tied up with a leather strap. Rebecca continued to look out of her hospital door for any sign of Evie, while Caspian unraveled the strap and looked through the forms. Did you read these? Caspian asked, his eyes darting back and forth over what he saw. Rebecca shrugged him off, still peeking down the hall for Evie. No, they were sent here a few weeks ago by the company lawyers. It's nothing. They always send me forms just to keep me abreast of what is going on in the day to day. Caspian's voice lowered. Rebecca, you need to read these. She turned to him and saw his face was still as stone. He had read what was couriered over to Rebecca for her to sign, although what was in front of the forms was already taken place without the need for her signature. The signature was a courtesy to show that they were at least attempting to get her to see what was happening. The papers were from the courts from Lear Lockwood, her own nephew. They were the papers pulling all control from Rebecca of Lord Publishing. She was no longer the queen of her kingdom. Jacob had upped her weeks and weeks ago, and she was none the wiser. Rebecca took the document she saw, the letterhead of the Lear law firm. Her stomach dropped. Lear hadn't contacted her at all in person, but there it was, all in black and white, written in the finest of legal jargon that Rebecca understood perfectly. That that bastard, Rebecca shouted. This is why I'm here. This is why Evie is here. How could he do this to me? How could Celeste do this? This can't be legal. It's from your own legal counsel, Caspian said. I pay them good money to make sure this kind of thing doesn't happen. Not to me. My brother's son knows better than to cross me, and if his father taught him right, he was smart enough to lay in a loophole here for his Aunt Rebecca to jump right through and catch Jacob at his own game. She said, but it's done. The dates are on the forms from weeks ago, Caspian said. Rebecca smiled, knowing that Jacob may have thought she was out of the count, but she stated before there was always a mistake. Lear would never do this to me, she said again. I'm going to read these over and over and over again, and by the time I'm done, I'll find a way to get this company back in my hands. My son has underestimated me for the very last time, Rebecca said. Caspian watched her go back to her chair with the stack of papers. She flipped the folder open and made sure not a word of anything in the forms wouldn't pass her eyes without her knowing exactly what it means. He then rolled over to her and grabbed her hand. He held it, and their eyes locked. I think it's time we go back to Terramore, Caspian said. Back to Terramore, Chas, he nodded. Together? He nodded again. They stared at each other, like two teenagers suddenly in love. She felt his kindness, his true, real kindness, beam out of his heart. They were once adversaries. They were once affection. They were once affectionate friends, and now he wanted to be her partner. Together, he said. He slowly got up from his chair. Shaking in his shoes, he held her up from the chair where he where she read the forms and slowly placed a kiss with his burned lip on hers. She stared at him after their lips parted. His eyes were the same, but his skin, scarred from the flames he almost died in, caused his him to look grotesque, frightening. But in her mind, the burn scars, the frightening remnants of the exorcism melted away, and once again his handsome face reappeared. She could see his tan skin without the scars, his warm brown eyes, his thick black hair, just as if it was when they first met. Together, they'd find a way to make Jacob rule the day he ever thought it was a good idea to cross his mother, Rebecca Lockwood Lord. A new mother sat on a rocking chair in a quiet, candle lit room, staring down at the angelic looking baby boy in front of her. How she longed for the birth her hopes and dreams had been so engrossed in the enchantment of the coming new life that were when real life got in the way of those hopes and dreams, there was nothing left. That's because this new mother, rocking a baby to sleep, was Mary Good, and the child in her arms was a child she was given to the foster and adopt because her own baby, a girl, died during birth after a vicious physical confrontation with the witch Jacqueline Gray. Mary was happy to that Mary was happy that she was able to give the new child a home that was already prepared to welcome a small little life like his. But it was bitter sweet for Mary. The child, although very adorable, didn't look like her. He didn't look like Philip, her baby's father. The child was sweet and looked up at Mary and her golden hair that shined in the candle light, almost giving her the look of having a halo. He looked up at her and seemed to not even notice that she wasn't his biological mother. After all, even to this newborn child, biological meant nothing when compared to who could give him love and protection. Philip and Mary, two very kind and hardworking people with human faults, could do this for the little boy. Mary would do this too. Every minute she held him in her arms, she felt closer to her own child that died. Her mind flashed back to Philip telling her that as awful as it was to lose a child, perhaps it was never meant to be. That it wasn't meant for them to lose their baby girl and that it was meant for them to lose their baby girl and welcome home this new boy who needed a home. Are you all right? Philip asked as he quietly entered the baby's tiny room in the cottage. Ashia is here with the paperwork for the judge at Augusta, he added. Without lifting her eyes to meet Philip, Mary nodded her head. I would hate for him to think he was taken in like a lost puppy. I want him to feel loved forever, always ours. He is ours, not only because he came into our lives, but at the right moment, but because those papers will make it so. Mary, he'll be our son. Mary smiled. He needs a name. That he does. Did you have one in mind? He asked, stepping closer to Mary and the child. If you wouldn't mind, I'd like to name him after my father. I didn't have a long time with him. He died when I was very young. It was hard growing up with my mother like mine without my father. All the stories I heard of him being my before my parents moved to Westport paint him as a good man, a kind man. My mother really loved him, Mary said. Of course, Philip smiled. Mary got up from the rocking chair and her body slowly folding up and allowing her dark twirled skirt to fall back down to her floor. Her wool shawl, a pale green, slipped from one shoulder as she walked over to Philip, who placed the shawl and kissed her forehead. Caleb Zachary, that's what we'll call him, our dear Caleb Zachary Braga, she said. Braga, Philip asked. We're not married yet. You're going to give him my last name? You're his father, Mary said with a sparkle in her eye with assertion. Of course, she smiled back. Philip's heart warmed. In the front room, as Shia Hoffman paced back and forth nervously, she worried that somehow Mary would figure out the baby was Aurora's with Cat and Caspian's. She worried the man she loved, Nick, would discover that she helped Gregory with taking the baby, selling Aurora. It was a girl, but the girl didn't survive birth. Ashia's heart was beating faster and faster as she paced, and as the anxiety built in her body, she could feel her pores open. She could feel tiny beads of sweat drip down her neck and down the collar of her dress. Ashia, we've signed and named the baby, Philip said, entering the room with his new little family. Ashia almost leaped out of her skin. Oh, this is wonderful. Congratulations. I'll take this to the courthouse right away so the lawyer can look it over, and once they sign off on it, they'll mail it out to the court in Augusta tomorrow morning. But I wouldn't worry about anything. You're both the new proud parents of a new baby, Ashia explained before looking at the baby's name on the documents. Caleb. Welcome home, Caleb. He already looks at home, Mary said. This was truly the best thing for him. I can tell you right now that the alternative would have been disastrous for him, Ashia said. The alternative? What do you mean? You said his mother died and that he had no father. What was the alternative? Mary asked. Oh, I just meant that, well, of course, the alternative was being left at a ward of the state and to live in an orphanage. You both came into Caleb's life at the perfect time, as she said, quickly recovering. And you're sure there is no father? Mary asked again. No, Ashia replied, lying. No other family members? Mary quizzed one more time. Ashia paused. Caleb's half siblings, Evie and Nick, popped into her mind. His birth mother, Aurora's face, too, and even Caspian's face, but she lied again. Not one. Mary smiled and turned her head down to the baby. Welcome home, then, indeed. As she felt the swift cooling effect of relief, Philip held his family close and tried as best he could to focus on them and not the swirling worlds of his Aunt Fatima in his mind. Disaster, Fatima's voice said. Dangerous. Philip heard her again. Darkness, Fatima's voice echoed again. Philip, Mary said. Danger, Fatima's voice echoed. Philip. Darkness, the echo continued. Philip, Mary shouted. Philip snapped out of his trance. I'm sorry, I was just daydreaming of our new son, he said. As Shia is leaving, would you walk her to the dock? Mary said, seeing Philip slightly out of sorts after her heart, hearing his aunt's warning over in his mind. Of course, of course. Philip grabbed his winter coat and helped Shia Hoffman out into the windy, snowing outdoors, leaving Mary and baby Caleb alone together. She placed him in a small bassinet near the warm fire as she walked into the adjoining kitchen where she'd start make some tea for herself and Philip, who'd need to warm his body after walking the she outside. As Mary made her tea, the little baby wiggled in his bassinet. He struggled to get comfortable. A chill swirled into with him, making him cry. I'll be right there, Mary said to him. As Mary fussed with the kettle of the tea in the kitchen, baby Caleb's eyes flashed from his natural brown to a wicked red with a cat eye pupil. But before Mary could see this, the baby's eyes turned to normal. His supernatural side, inherited from the creature that fathered him and inhabited Caspian at the time of his conception, was already peeking through in a powerful debut, and no one was the wiser. The following day, Celeste entered Churchill Green in a luxurious black and gold dress, covered by a thick mink coat that shined in the lights that hung to golden fixtures on a marble hospital wall. Her deep brown eyes peeked out from under a thin hat with the longest feathers of a peacock back as she scanned the lobby of the asylum's ward for nurse. Various patients that had been transferred from Wincliffe Sanitarium on the mainland were scattered about the corners of the hospital. Most seemed coherent, but there were a few that walked over to the wall, dressed Celeste, and pleated her coat. Bunny, one woman in a purple dress, said, her hair tattered from lack of sleep, her eyes sunken and dark, dead. She then said, with a sick grin that showed the decay of her teeth, Celeste nervously smiled and removed the patient's hand from her arm, quickly rushed over to the nurse who came out of a patient's room. Excuse me, I'm looking for a patient, Evangeline George Lord. This way. The two made a quick walk down the hall, passing open rooms where patients talked to themselves and sang to themselves. There were some who were even tied to their beds, locked in their minds and the bodies, and world they could never describe to the doctors. They were treating their mental illness. Celeste shuddered as she walked. The chill of the hospital air, warmer than the frightening looks of various patients she passed in the halls, shot as she walked with the nurse. She's in there, the third door on the left. It should be unlocked. We haven't noticed her being any way violent, the nurse pointed. Celeste grabbed the nurse's arm before she could leave. I'm sorry, violent? Are you expecting her to be? Oh, well, on her chart, nurse said, scheming the files on her board, it says attacked someone. So we may have her in the ward. This part of the building houses the people who are or could act in ways that are violent. So far, she's been so you could be should be okay. The nurse smiled and yanked her arm out of Celeste's grasp and carried with her duties, not knowing Celeste was one who Evie was supposedly was violent with. Celeste slowly walked down the hall to Evie's room. It was quiet. Even in the violent patient's part of the asylum ward, Celeste had imagined anger flowing all over the place, righteous patients screaming awful smells from people's rooms, but the decay of Churchill Green was nowhere in sight. After all, this was a new, revamped part of the Welshport Hope, a refurbished building that still had the scent of wet paint in the halls. Inside her room, Evie struggled to read a book that was given her the night before by a kind nurse when she arrived. It wasn't the type of book she often read. No art, all story. Evie was a creative person. She enjoyed reading, but when it was just pages and pages of letters and sentences squeezed together, her mind would wander and imagine the great museums of art. And much she reimagined herself strolling across the bridge of Antwerp and Copenhagen, searching for the finest Europe had to offer. She missed those days, the days when she lived in Europe and could travel to see art and experience the finest place in the world had to offer. A knock on her door broke her concentration on the book and her dreams of art. Evie stood up, expecting a nurse to barge in with more tests and new meds, sort of what happened to her at Wincliffe, but she was shocked to see the elegantly dressed Celeste enter, her former best friend. Get out, Evie said, with a hiss in her voice. Evie, please, we need to talk. I need to tell you why this has happened, explain things. We need to come to an understanding. And when you see where Jacob and I are coming from, then maybe you can forgive me. Forgive you? How do you expect me to do that, Celeste? You and Jacob went behind my back and convinced a court to do what I was somehow unable to care for my child because of dreams that I was having, and you had me placed here. And what's worse, you know me. You know that I would never ever put Gabriel in any danger. I love him. He's my baby. Celeste gulped. Evie, Jacob saw you on the ledge. You almost jumped. The words coming from Celeste's mouth were like bullets from a gun. Evie knew what she had done. She knew that the night of her dark dream could have killed her, but she never would have put Gabriel in any danger. She was sure of it. Maybe. You still betray me. I don't know. Maybe we could have figured something out. Maybe less covert, something less conniving. We could have helped each other. You didn't help me. Instead, you went along with this whole idea that Jacob put in your head. The same Jacob that did all the terrible things the night before and to Sebastian and to Mary and to Rebecca. My God, Rebecca. She's here too. He put her here too. What is this going? What is he going to do, Celeste? Get the whole family committed so that he can take control of Lord Publishing? Maybe you should watch your back too. Wouldn't be the first woman he slept with that he didn't dispose of. Celeste stepped closer to Evie, who was fuming. She could see that the veins, Evie's neck bulging, anger was stirring all over Evie's face, and she was set to make Celeste feel the worst she could possibly. Evie had no plans on letting Celeste leave the hospital feeling she had done the right thing. I know you're angry. Evie cut her off. Of course I am. Then this is the best place for you to find out how to deal with that anger and depression and all of what's been hurting you. And when you're better, When your doctor says you're better, you'll be back with Gabriel, Celeste said, knowing it was all a lie and not part of her plan with Jacob. Evie smiled and shook her head. My God, you really believe in this horseshit, aren't you? Jacob has really changed you. When we first met, you were always the first to warn me of the dangers of this family. Now falling in line with him could burn me faster than the heart of 1,000 suns. Now you stand in front of me looking like a queen or something, trying to convince me that you're being authentic and real. You're not Celeste. You're not real. You're not who I thought you were. You're not the friend that I thought you were, Evie shouted. Behaving like this will never get you your son back, Celeste said. Evie's eyes narrowed. Her heart felt it stop beating in her chest. She only saw her black. The words swimming in her mind from Celeste dangling. The fact little Gabriel had been taken from her by Celeste and Jacob made her body heat up. Her mind furious, Evie reached back and slapped Celeste across the face again. Celeste's face stunned, red hot, but this time Celeste returned the slap. Evie lunged at Celeste. She pulled the peacock hat off Celeste's head. Celeste yelped like a puppy, getting her foot stepped on as she reached back and pulled Evie's hair so that it yanked her head back violently. Evie too screamed and started scratching at Celeste's face, trying to force her to let go. In the blink of an eye, Nick Jordan entered the room as he had just gotten to work, being his shift in the ward. He dropped his folders and pen and rushed over to separate the women. Enough, enough, Nick shouted, pulling Celeste off of Evie. The separation yanked Evie from the side of the room. The other fell to the floor. Are you right, Nick asked Celeste. She said nothing and nodded her head yes. From the ground, the beleaguered Evie jumped up with the pen in her fist and lunged at Celeste as if she were going to stab her. Nick intervened and pulled her backwards until he locked her in place between him and the hospital room. Evie, incredibly hurt and scared by the betrayal of her friend Celeste, screamed words that no one understood and burst into tears. She dropped the pen. Evie, calm down. Calm down, please, calm down, Nick said as Evie began to hyperventilate. The pain was immense. The betrayal was potent. Evie felt desperate. She had lost everything. She had lost the man she loved, the child adored, and now her freedom. She was trapped in an asylum. She couldn't see herself out of this place. It was different this time. Not like her last time at Winkcliffe. She had Alice who helped her, pulled her through the darkness and most awful treatments Dr. Kim put Evie through. Perhaps Nick would help her at Churchill, but something was different. The entire situation felt hopeless. It all came to a head right here in the room with Celeste. I think you should go, Nick said as Evie began to calm down. Celeste said before Nick. Go, Celeste. Celeste nodded. Nick slowly slid Evie along the wall and away from the door to the room that Celeste could pass safely. Celeste picked up her hat, fixed the feathers, and made her way past Evie, whose eyes watched Celeste every step. Now alone with his sister, Nick walked over to her bed. He sat her down, and she took a deep breath and lay back down, her eyes staring up at the ceiling. Nick fixed up the somewhat messy room after the fight and gathered his things. He picked up his doctor bag that was on a chair and took out a syringe and filled it with medicine. What are you doing? Evie asked her brother. I'm going to give you something to help you sleep, Nick asked. Nick said, no, Nick, please, I don't want to sleep. I need to think about what What's going to happen? She asked. Evie, I need you to listen to me, Nick ordered. She grabbed her arm, lifted her sleeve, and struck her with no he need injection the medication as Evie looked on in horror. Sorry, you're not getting out of here. Do you understand me? You're not. Lords are very powerful. They have this whole damn thing tied up in courts. For now, for now, we can't get you out in any kind of injunction. You understand me? You have to have yourself and act appropriately, or it'll only get worse. Go to sleep, Evie. Just go to sleep. Tomorrow's a different day. We'll figure things out from there. Do you understand me? Sleep now. Sleep. Nick's voice started to sound warped. His warnings slowly faded into blackness as Evie fell into a sleep from the medication. She began to see flashing lights like she was in a tunnel, and the end of the tunnel was breaking through something in the distance. There was something in the distance. She felt the cold air of the winter all around her. She opened her eyes. She realized she was not at all awake. She was in another dream, and the cold air wasn't the fresh Welshport breeze she had become accustomed to. It was the cold air of Dr. Andrew Kim's laboratory at Wincliffe. There he was, dressed in all white, his hair thick and black, combed back. He was a doctor that had tormented her for months and months on the mainland. He smiled at her evilly. She was tied to the bed, naked and only covered by a white sheet. The room was all white, Kim's tools shiny and metal. Everything felt sterile and cold. Are you awake now? Dr. Kim asked. Evie shook her head no. Ah, yes, you are. Don't be afraid, Evangeline. This won't hurt a bit. Evie tried to get out of the bed, but she struggled with the ties around her wrists and ankles. She moved and moved, but she could not get up. Dr. Kim moved over a medicine Evie was very familiar with. It was shock therapy medicine. He flipped it on. It buzzed with the sound of the million buzzes swirling around her. He brought it closer to her and locked down. He smiled in attempt to calm her. She knew what was happening next. Nurse, Dr. Kim said the guard. A nurse dressed in white entered an all white room. Evie tilted her head. It was the nurse approached, and it was Celeste. Open wide, Celeste said, forcing the rubber mouth guard into Evie's mouth. All right, let's begin, Dr. Kim said. Dr. Kim replaced the halo around Evie's head. They had 4 wires attached to it. The halo was then plunged into the medicine that sounded like bees. Ready? 1, 2, 3. The countdown led to Kim twisting knobs on the machine and zapping electric currents into Evie's body, shocking her. She bit down on the rubber band mouthguard and screamed so loud that it woke her up in the middle of the night. Her bed at Churchill Green. Evie lay in her bed, sweating profusely. Her scream didn't just wake her up. In the thick of the brush of the Terramore forest, night had come to it. Evie's scream all the way from Churchill Green woke the vampire Sebastian. Evie, Jacqueline, who was standing near the door of the bedroom, had come to see what all the commotion was. She heard the first words as he woke. The name of the woman he loved more than anything in the world. He lay there panting and worried for Evie, and Jacqueline stood in the room and stared blankly at him, seeing all her work to keep him for herself slowly erode away with one little breathly word, Evie. So that's the read along, guys. What I find most interesting is I sort of wonder if Caspian is gonna find find dirt on Jacob, or more importantly, Rebecca's going to start like I think what's going I think what I think is going to happen is they'll probably get married and they'll that's how they'll get out. And I think see, you can report something anonymously even at those times. Like you could write something anonymously or have somebody write something anonymously. I think they're gonna fuck with Jake apart. I think like fuck with him, drive him crazy maybe. Even though he's married, but I think they're gonna drive him nuts. That's my prediction. But I could be wrong. That did. Don't go to Vegas with those. Remember, don't. Um, so link to Benight and Beguile is going to be in the description box. Really good. Great, excellent character development. To me, this is really good. I enjoy it as much as I enjoyed The Return of Dark Shadows. This is really good, guys. If you have not checked this out, obviously there's going to be a link in the description box. I'm going to share this story on Twitter as well. Or sorry, X. It's called X now. My God, the name changes in this world. All right, guys, you have a good night.